It's a wider angle than I anticipated.
Go.
Good afternoon. So my name is Zach Davis. I am the program manager for Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline. And thank you so much for joining us. We are having some technical difficulties, so we're just going to get here and we're going to start it here just. Are we ready? Yeah. Sorry about that. We're just working out the kinks. So our agenda is the following slide that you can see here. What is Best Starts for Kids? Brief overview of Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline strategy. Brief overview of the Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline RFP. Where to find data and how to use it. Zoom grant, how to apply online, and questions and answers. So the BSK, Best Starts for Kids vision is we want to see more babies born healthy, more kids thrive, and more young people grow up to be happy, healthy, successful adults. And how we do that. So there's 4 aspects to it: promotion, prevention, early intervention, policy, and systems change.
We're having some technical difficulties that folks on the line can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
So just give us a moment to try to figure that out.
Just 1 second here.
So looks like folks are hearing now.
Can you hear us okay? Lori from Youth Care? Yeah, okay. Okay, we're good. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
All right, as I was saying, yeah, let's just go back and then we'll just speed up here so we can honor people's time. So, folks can hear us now. So again, my name is Zach Davis. I am the program manager for Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline strategy, which is part of Best Starts for Kids. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Here is just a brief rundown of what our agenda is going to look like. What is Best Starts for Kids? A brief overview of the Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline strategy. Brief overview of Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline RFP. Where to find data and how to use it. Zoom grants, how to apply online, and questions and answers. The vision for Best Starts for Kids is we want to see more babies born healthy, more kids thrive, and more young people grow up to be happy, healthy, successful adults. And here's how we do it. There's 4 components to it: promotion, prevention, early intervention, policy, and systems change. Our approach: support community-based organizations, local government, schools, and other nonprofits to provide opportunities for youth and young adults, primarily of color, ages 12 to 24, to enhance their commitment to school, completion of graduation from high school or post-secondary education, successfully gain employment, and I can't see the bottom part there.
Positive cultural identification.
Sorry, this screen's cutting off part of the slide here, so we're just going to do this manually. And then you'll see the last component there. You'll take notice that is a different bullet, and that is positive cultural identity development. What makes Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline strategy so unique? Well, there's the first component, which is equity and social justice lens, and that's part of Best Starts for Kids in general. And then there's specifically the age and population focus. This strategy is open to youth and young adults ages 12 to 24. Youth and young adults most at risk of involvement with the justice system, primarily youth and young adults of color. And you'll see that language a little bit more clearly in the RFP. And then there's community supports, which is often referred to as outreach and case management. And in addition to that, there's support groups, educational workshops, meetings, healing circles. And when we talk about community support, what we're primarily talking about is relationship, guidance, and resources. So in terms of outreach and case management, it's the same concept. What makes Stopping the School to Prison Pipeline strategy so unique is, in addition to just the elements, there are the goals. One, replace stop in the school to prison pipeline with something that we often refer to as school to life success path. And the second component is support racial healing of and traumatic wounds experienced by youth and young adults of color so they are able to believe in themselves and feel supported by a loving community. And again, if you want a little bit more of an exhaustive list as to what the goals are and what they specifically talk about, I would recommend looking at the language in the RFP. In terms of guiding principles, you'll notice that we have 6 listed here and 2 that we primarily want to focus on, but I'll just go through all 6 of them. The first is we want to prioritize voices and choices of communities most affected and solicit their support to change widespread and cultural inequities. Number 2, improve our partners' organizational staff capacity, i.e. leadership development to serve youth and young adults. And then a third, invest in culturally relevant, reflective, responsive, and creative programs that build on the strengths and experiences of youth and young adults, community partners, and residents. So when we talk about invest in terms of what does it mean to be culturally relevant and reflective, well, think of it in terms of this. We want to make sure that the people who are working with the youth and young adults actually reflect the community and the background of those youth and young adults. And that's not just the direct service staff, but the organization as a whole. We would like to see what we regard as a significant representation of those of that particular community that you're serving. And when we talk about culturally relevance, it may perhaps be the curriculum or the type of services, but essentially what we're looking into is how are you honoring the culture of that particular community that you're serving or the youth and young adults that you're working with. And then the fourth one is build upon restorative healing practices and comprehensive approaches in consultation with youth and young adults, families, and credible messengers, or other concerned adults across our county. Number 5, increase youth and young adults' positive cultural identity, self-worth, and, sorry, it's blocking my view, and leadership skills. So when we're talking about this, positive cultural identity development is a huge component that impacts the youth's perception of themselves. And obviously, when we start talking about education and employment, if a youth is going to have any sort of ambitions and dreams, that's directly correlated to their sense of value, their worth. And so in order to really help youth go down that school to life success path, part of what we're talking about is how do we honor their cultural identity development? How do we encourage them to be who they are? How do we enhance their sense of well-being? And so the 6th one is create trusting relationships and partnerships with community members to further develop school to life success path. Next slide. Funding specifics. We expect to fund at a range of levels up to $400,000 for up to 18 months. So that's starting from January 2018 to June 2019. Funding beyond the first 18 months will depend on King County budget approval and program performance. So what we're talking about in that case is the first contract will be for 18 months, and then if we decide to move forward with renewing the contract for another 18 months, that is determined by both the King County budget process and as well as whether in fact the program is working and we want to continue to fund it. And then the third component is because we don't know how many applications and for what amounts, we do not know how many organizations will be funded. Timeline. So the RFP was issued, as you probably already know, I think it was last Friday, and the information sessions, we've already had 2 bidders conferences in the communities, one on the 25th and the 26th, and then we're obviously having a webinar now on the 30th. Final day to ask questions and receive technical assistance is on November 14th. Responses to and submissions for the RFP are going to be due by November 20th. 11:59 p.m. and I can't stress that enough. Again, it's 11:59 p.m. I would recommend that you not wait until the last minute to submit your proposal, because if there's any technical difficulties, then it may result in you missing the deadline, and we don't want to see that happen. So we recommend getting those in as soon as possible. There will be interviews for all of those who make it beyond the first round of the selection process. So the review panel will spend some time determining who is going to be interviewed, and then once we do the interviews, that will happen the week of December 18th through the 22nd. And then we will then go through the responses then we'll go through the final review process, December 8th through the 15th. So our dates are backwards here. Oh, okay, so 8th through the 15th, we'll be reviewing the applications, but then the interviews will happen the 18th through the 22nd, and then we'll determine and notify those who have been selected on December 29th, and we'll begin the contracts. We'll meet starting in January for the contracts to determine what we are going to have for the performance measures. Rating criteria. So the first component there is equity and social justice lens. So basically you're providing a clear description of the social historical context, i.e. if there's any disparities and whatnot. And then the second bullet there is community engagement, youth and young adults and community members involved throughout the process. So what we're looking for is how have you been engaging youth and young adults with this process, but more importantly, how have you been engaging the entire community in the designing and developing this program, as well as how will they be incorporated in the implementation of your proposed program. And then stopping the school to prison pipeline goals and guiding principles, as we talked about before, making sure that your proposal reflects those, if there's a clear connection between those two. And then a clear program focus and goals within the time frame. We realize that some folks have programs that exceed beyond the 18 months, but what we're listening for and what we're looking for is what do you hope to accomplish, or what do you plan to accomplish within those 18 months? And then there are the goals that, how are the goals achievable with the budget request? So basically, we're providing you with this particular amount of funding that you requested. Are the goals actually achievable with that funding? Technical assistance, you'll see here, and I won't go through this, but you'll see a list here of folks who we have contracted with to provide you at no cost technical assistance with your proposal. And so for this next slide here, I'm going to have my colleague, Sofia Ayala, share a little bit more about the data and evaluation component.
Hi everyone, my name is Sofia Ayala and I'm part of the Best Starts for Kids evaluation team. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about our approach to evaluation. Evaluation is a very important part of the Best Starts for Kids initiative, and we will have evaluation for all of our programs. But we really want to emphasize that our approach is one of partnership and collaboration and accessibility. So we want to be working with organizations to evaluate what makes sense for their programs and to really be working on capacity building around evaluation. And a bit more detail around that. So every program will participate in performance measurement of some type and some type of reporting of data about their program. We wanted to make clear that evaluation plans are not required as part of your application. We really want to work together with you to develop an evaluation plan. And so we'll be sitting down with all funded agencies to work together to decide what makes sense to measure for your program. And then where feasible, we will try to coordinate with other data collection. So if you're already reporting certain metrics for another funder, we'll try to coordinate where possible, because we're trying not to have an extra burden on you. And we just wanted to emphasize also that in your application itself, we really encourage you to bring in data and other information to help tell your organization's story and why you're uniquely suited to do the work that you're proposing to do. And we wanted to make clear that it's not just numbers, although numbers are great. We also encourage you to bring in other types of information to help tell your story. So that could be a story from a client that you've worked with before, if they've given you permission to share it. It could be pictures of the work you do. It could be maps. So really get creative in terms of the materials that can support your story. And we also have a website called the Best Starts for Kids Indicators site. So here's the link here, but you can also find the link in the application. And what this is a website that shows all of the different metrics that we're monitoring at the population level for Best Starts for Kids. So for example, here's a screenshot showing high school graduation rates. So this data is up on the website and available for any organization to use in their application if it's helpful to you. You're not required to use it, but it's there as a resource. And when you go to the website, you can sort by different age groups. So you can look through for the 5 through 24 indicators that are relevant to this strategy. And then last but not least, if you'd like to learn more about using data or other information to support your application, we did a webinar recently that you can find on the Best Starts for Kids blog. So this is the link, but you can also just go to the blog and look for it. And you can find a lot more information around telling your story with data. And the technical assistance providers can also help with this as well. All right, well, thanks very much. And I'm going to turn things over to my colleague now, Reginald Cole, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about using Zoom Grants, which is our application system.
Hello everyone. So for this application, we'll be utilizing Zoom Grants. It's an online application system that I'll be covering with you all the details that you'll need to apply for this RFP. So 4 major things that you want to know. So Zoom Grants University, when you go to click the help button, there's going to be a ton of information that you'll be able to utilize. Don't worry, even though it says university, you don't have to learn a ton of things for this application. It's a very straightforward application that we'll walk through with various screenshots. The autosave feature, the great thing about this application process is as you're doing your work, it will autosave and you will have the ability to go back into your application and continue working on it, as well as have other folks work on the application with you. The tab system works very similar to tabs on the top of a web browser. Rather than scrolling down your screen to find all the different aspects of the application, you'll actually click on the tabs that will give you instructions on what to do next. Then the check for completion. The great thing about this process is you'll know for sure that everything has been completed. Anything that is not filled in will be marked in red, and we'll let you know to go back and complete that task. And we'll also give you a check mark, a green check mark on your screen and the time letting you know that it was submitted. So you will for sure know that everything was completed. So about this tutorial, you'll see various numbers and letters on your screen. The numbers and letters will correlate directly with the instructions, and I'll walk you through step by step. Okay, so for this page, this is going to be the first page that you see. So if you go to the Best Starts for Kids blog and click on our link, you'll see a page very similar. You will not see all the applications on the left side. You'll more than likely just see one application, which is this RFP. The great thing is for folks who don't want to immediately jump into the application, if you press the preview button, you will be able to see the full application as if you were an applicant. And for those who would like to move forward, you can see where the number 1 is. You'll be able to create your account there and then go to where number 2 is to actually click in and apply. So once you enter into Zoom Grants, you will have your main page. That's the first thing you're going to see is your summary page. So underneath, if you look underneath where it says number 2, you should see a tab that says Summary, Pre-application, Application Questions, Budget, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned, the first thing you'll see is the summary page where you'll have instructions, you'll put in your overall information, and this will be the page where you get started. So number 1, where you see Contact Admin, we'll review another way to send in all your questions. That is going to be a last resort button that you'll use, but we'll review that in more detail. We're actually going to use the activity log button for questions. So looking at number 2, the open programs, as I mentioned, those are the tabs that you'll click to access all aspects of the application. And then where the B is print preview, you can actually fill out your application and print it out and read through it that way. Or you can just do a general print preview to see what the full application looks like on paper. Okay, so looking into the tabs. So where the number 1 is, that's right above the budget tab. This is an example of what you will see. You will have a table on your application where you fill in your numbers for various items, and where the letter A is, it will actually total up those items for you, and that will be included in your application. So while you're working on the applications, you're always able to go back into your application and you'll see your home screen. So where the number 1 is, you'll see the title up there. It says My Account Home. Where the number 2 is, that will show you where any incomplete applications are. One thing you have to be aware of is if you refresh your page with your browser instead of the Zoom Grants refresh page button, it might show multiple incomplete applications. So you want to make sure you are utilizing the refresh page button within Zoom Grants to avoid that. Secondly, on this screen, right near the number 1, you'll be able to also edit your profile. So if you want to change your password, edit an item of your organization's name, you can do so here. Okay, so in terms of support, we are definitely here to support you with this new process. The technical assistance team, which will be, you'll see their attachment with all their contacts within your library. Speaking on the library, when you are in Zoom Grants, there will be a section titled Library with links to download the RFP, download all the attachments, and click on to see different links that Sophia mentioned earlier, such as BSK indicators, etc. For the activity log button, you'll be using this button in Zoom Grants to get in touch with the program administrator. So we'll review that right now. Okay, so looking at the screen on the far right where it says Submit Now and Print Preview, there's a button that's titled Activity Log. When you click that button, the screenshot that you see now is what will appear. So there's about 4 or 5 lines indicating dates and the text that I sent. Below that, there are a few radio buttons that you can click, and the one that you're going to want to click is the Grant Maker Request. When you click that button, you type in your question below, and you'll click Submit. It won't auto-populate your question, so make sure that you just click it once, because if you click it multiple times, it will send the message over and over again. But if you want to see if your message was sent, you can click the refresh page button in the top right, which is underneath your name, and it should show that your question is there. Worst case scenario, if you're having any problems and you feel like your message hasn't gone through, feel free to use the Contact Admin button. But again, using the activity log is going to be our key space for questions. That being said, as questions come through, depending on your question, most questions will be answered through the FAQ, which will be posted weekly into the library, and all the questions that we have from our past webinars as well as today will be posted in our library as well. So over time, as I mentioned, we have had past webinars that have touched on many different areas such as funding, Zoom grants, eligibility. So as you're looking through the questions, take a look to see if there's any specific themes that you notice, because some of those questions may kind of wrap into one, and that should be posted on the Skype site for you, and we will transition back to Zach with our question section.
Okay, thank you so much for everybody's patience as we work through some of those details, and I realize folks may have quite a few questions. Now, just to clarify, we do have a number of questions that folks from previous bidders conferences have already asked, and I was going to take a moment just to review some of those so that if there is anything else that we wanted to cover, we could ask it afterwards. So the first question is what are the 3 main aspects of community supports? Again, that's relationship, guidance, and resources. Is funding reimbursable? Yes. But there has been precedents for advancements where justified, this is at the discretion of the county and will not be guaranteed during the proposal selection process. If you do need advancement, please provide an explanation. We generally do monthly reimbursements, so you would submit an invoice in February for January services and costs. Next one is there an opportunity for a paper application as well? No, there isn't, but you can print out the application elements from the library as a resource. Do Zoom grants applications save automatically, as Reginald talked about? Yes, a green save image will blink on your page after you click out of the completed question. What made you decide to change to online submissions? I won't get into that too much, but basically we had a series of discussion and community service provider discussions, and the conversation reflected a desire for an online process that regarded as more convenient or accessible and less an online process was regarded as more convenient and accessible, less cumbersome than a paper application process. Is this PowerPoint available to us online? Yes, this whole PowerPoint, as well as the frequently asked questions, will be made available after the webinar. We hope to link BSK funds with other grants, contracts with similar intentions. Can we assume this is acceptable? Yes, it is. So long as you can justify the combined amount from all the grant sources in addition to the requested amount in your proposal. Is the City of Seattle limits outside grant coverage? No, while there is an emphasis on South King County, this funding is not necessarily exclusive to South King County. Is South Seattle considered South King County for this RFP? Yes, but please bear in mind that we are currently already funding 3 different organizations in West and South Seattle, hence our desire to increase coverage in areas where there is less known relevant services, i.e. Kent and Auburn. How do we help people move from the talk stage to the action stage? Many are tired of talking and seeing no action as a result. This depends on the applicant's community relationships and ability to steward the voice and choices of their community. The RFP mentions connecting older youth to secure employment, but not college access / persistence. If we don't focus on employment, should we focus on younger students? Is college persistence a part of this RFP? No, the age range is 12 to 24 years old. Yes, depending on the proposal, college persistence could fall within the scope of this RFP. We work with low-income youth and young adults of color, but not those who are necessarily already involved in juvenile prison. Are we still a fit? Yes, the program doesn't require youth to be involved in criminal justice system. This RFP's focus includes those who are considered at risk. Is it better to ask for a lower amount versus higher amount? We noticed that because of competitiveness of BSK, many funders are not funding at the highest levels. I cannot speak to the decision-making process for other RFP awards, but for this RFP, we understand the expenses related to starting a new program. Thus, we are comfortable with funding proposals that can justify the use of the maximum requested amount. Okay, so it looks like we have a few questions. My communications person has let me know here, so hold on just a second here, and I'm going to try to answer some of these questions. Okay. Question, the RFP talks about outreach, case management supports, job readiness, cultivating self-worth. Given the wide range of goals and principles of the RFP, what outcomes are you interested in seeing as a result of responses to this RFP? I'm not exactly sure what this person means. Is this, oh, Lori. Okay, so Lori from Youth Care. So in terms of outcomes, well, obviously, we want to see completion of school, and I think this is something that we mentioned earlier on, and it's also mentioned in the RFP. So I feel like I'm backtracking a little bit here, but essentially what we're talking about here when we say cultivating self-worth and and how that lines up with the principles. Well, the principles are a way of just guiding the process of how we do the work that we do. The outcomes is focused on everything from education to employment, but we know that if you're going to help youth in terms of education and employment, everything from school attendance, increased school attendance, graduation, whether from middle school, high school, or college, or maybe from a trade school, seeing them pursue some type of career, seeing them have any sort of ambition, that I think that has a lot to do with their sense of self-worth. We notice that, at least from my experience, that if you have somebody who does not have a sense of self-worth or has a depleted sense of value, that's going to have a huge impact on their ability to really pursue anything, let alone retain their involvement in it. So let's say you are able to find a youth a job, but they're struggling with a lot of issues around depression, having to do with sense of values, worth. Perhaps their community or environment doesn't do a very good job of supporting them with that. They've experienced a lot of hostility in the school environments. Those sort of things can manifest themselves in these youth struggling to want to even stay in a job. And we've seen some youth who, because they don't really think they can accomplish anything or that their life is going to go anywhere, even if they do get a job, they don't stay in it for very long. We see this issue also in college retention as well. Next question is, can an applicant submit a request that is focused on policy and systems rather than direct connections with youth? No, this is geared towards, again, relationship, guidance, and resources. So that should be the primary focus of the RFP. Now, if it has a policy systems change to it, that's great, but for this particular RFP, we are focused on direct services. Who wrote this RFP? Were any communities it is meant to serve consulted in the writing of the RFP or the review of this RFP prior to its release? Yes. So this RFP was in collaboration with a number of folks, both within King County as well as people in the community. One of the things that we were intentional about doing was establishing something that we refer to as a community task force made up of various youth and young adults, parents, and community service providers, as well as legislative aides from the council members and, again, other government employees who served as thought partners, who served as accountability, and actually helped draft the language for the RFP. And they were located throughout the South King County area. So for me to go down a long list of who they are, but I think we can also be, I think we can also continue to grow in our ability to engage the community. While we have been engaging a number of folks all the way from South Seattle all the way down to Federal Way, it's a growing group, and we hope to have more participants. And if you're interested in being part of that task force, we can have a conversation about that after the RFP has been completed, or is implemented, excuse me. Jake asks, we are considering submitting 2 proposals for 2 separate programs. Can we create multiple concurrent applications in Zoom grants in response to this RFP? Yes, you can. Just know that those 2 proposals that you create, along with the rest of the proposals that are submitted, will be competing against one another, so we can't guarantee that you will get both of those proposals awarded. So are you aiming for people to be placed in jobs, reduce juvenile justice involvement, improve self-worth? Lori, yes, we are aiming for people to be placed in jobs, but it's not enough to be placed in a job. I think it's one thing to just be placed, in whatever employment we can get them. I think it's a whole other thing to help these youth identify a sense of direction, perhaps some career ambitions, and the improved self-worth. Obviously, we would have a discussion around what would the performance measurements look like for that, and that would be a collaborative conversation. But in terms of the proposal, it's not enough to just give youth services. When you have a relationship with them, you're providing guidance. Are you helping them to tap into their cultural heritage? Are you helping them to know their value? And so we want to see that increase, as well as, obviously, reduce juvenile involvement, but it's not enough to just say, well, this youth is not in jail anymore. Well, where are they going, and how are we helping them to go there, and discovering all their strengths and skills? Can we submit attachments? As I mentioned before, and I know I went down the list very quickly due to time. Yes, you can submit attachments, a total of no more than 3. So yeah, if you have charts, photos, those sorts of things, you can attach those. Can you please restate where you can find a list of questions from potential applicants and answers from King County? So we haven't posted the frequently asked questions yet. We wanted to wait until we had all of your questions to incorporate all of that and make that available along with the webinar. Yes, along with the webinar, so that'll be available. And it'll be in the library section of Zoom grants. The audio keeps cutting out, so that's 2 questions. Yes, the answers will be posted soon. I'm sorry for the audio cutting in and out and for the technical difficulties. Hopefully we'll be able to get that fixed when we post the webinar recording. And I'm getting a yes from my communications person. Where can I find the recording of this webinar? Can I download the slideshow? If so, where? That will be on the BSK blog. and Hannah's responding to that right now. And Rachel's asking, does a budget section on the Zoom grants replace the attachment 3 budget form and narrative that was included with the RFP? I'm getting a nod yes from Reginald. And all the narrative will be within Zoom grants now as well, correct? And that is a nod as yes from Reginald. He is my go-to person for the Zoom grants, so forgive me if I'm looking over at him. That's insofar, if I may, with the little bit of time that we have left, I would like, so I'm getting a notification. You might want to just talk about that. Okay. Okay. Reginald will get to that in just a second in terms of some of the technical components to Zoom grants and regarding the attachments, but I'll just finish some of these frequently asked questions, and then if you have more questions, we can try to respond to those as well. Where did I leave off? 13. Okay, so we'll just cruise through this real quick, and bear with me here. Is it better to ask for lower amounts? We already talked about that. Did we answer the question for that one? Okay, so is it better to ask for a lower amount versus higher amount? We noticed that because of competitiveness of BSK, many funders are not funding at the highest levels. Again, I can't speak to how the award process happened for other RFPs, but for this particular RFP, we understand the expenses related to starting a new program, thus we are comfortable with funding and proposals that can justify the use of the maximum requested amount. What if long-term impact is longer than 18 months? As I talked about before, we'll work closely with contract partners to identify performance measures that take into consideration the timeline for programs that exceed the 18 months for the initial contract. We also encourage applicants to explain in the application what can happen within the 18 months along with what your impact is after the 18 months. And then the last part of that is, while this strategy has been continuing contracts up to 3 years, please know that we cannot guarantee funding for a renewed contract. We do not anticipate a budget shortfall, but cannot make any promises. So we're not anticipating that money will go down, but we can't make any promises. So let's see. Lori is there any preference for existing programs versus new programs? Not off the top of my head. I don't think that's necessarily the focus. The question is who would be providing the best, who is providing the best options or is making the best proposal in terms of providing services, particularly, I mean, obviously throughout the county, but particularly in South King County area, just because that is where, as it's defined in the RFP, where a lot of the youth who would be most impacted by this RFP, that's where they reside. Is there a preference for multiple partners submitting a combined request? There isn't actually. That's a great question, Paul. No, there isn't a preference for that, simply because we wanted to give those who may not necessarily have those kind of relationships already set in place, we wanted to give them an equitable opportunity to have access to this funding. Is the 5th page, is there a 5-page limit based on view and Zoom grants? So you'll notice that there is a character limit in Zoom grants, and that's based off of the 5-page limit that we typically would have done if we were going through, historically, the way we do procurements in the past was with a paper submission. And if I continue on here, see, oh, yeah, that was the question. Okay. Can a single organization, we already asked that, see, demographics. As a large organization, our total demographics is very different to our direct service staff demographic in South King County. Do we include the whole organization, or can we focus on the relevant staff? So this is an interesting question where basically the person who asked this was just asking, listen, our organization is, in terms of leadership, is primarily white, but would we talk about that, or just those who are working with the youth? So our response to that is we want to know more about the people making decisions for the organization and for the proposed program. And if your organization is struggling to reflect the demographic your proposal is claiming to serve, you are welcome to acknowledge the need and how you intend to address it, i.e. establish a provisional committee, community-based committee to oversee the decisions for the program. Okay, so now we're going to unmute so those on the phone can ask questions. I didn't even know that was an option. That's great. Just as soon as we get that figured out. We good? Just be patient with us here. We're getting this sorted out. Okay, so while she's figuring that out, I'll just keep on answering questions. So, let's see here. Why didn't we call out youth? Why didn't we call out youth with disabilities in the RFP? The application provides the opportunity to identify which populations you are planning to serve. We didn't list every impacted group or characteristic, but that doesn't mean that we aren't interested in funding programs for youth with disabilities or other groups not mentioned in the RFP. Oh, we got volume. Can folks hear us? Anybody?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, we're just working through the. Is the volume turned up all the way? Okay. Hello. Is there anybody? Does anybody have any questions? Is anyone out there? Okay, I'm just gonna keep on going then, because we're getting low on time here. Should we indicate if we are also applying for other King County or BSK funds? There are several other RFPs open right now. The question to that is you should indicate what your other funding source funding requests are for the narrative section. You would do that in the narrative section of the application. And I think the most important thing is just to be transparent about what other funding you're getting and where it's coming from. What if the case manager is linking bridges between family, police, schools, other systems, resources? Does this qualify? Response to that is yes. How do you define outreach? Go to where the most impacted youth and young adults are, foster relationships, and help them engage in services. Can outreach be done in the schools, or does it need to be done in the streets? My answer to that is it can be either or both. Can 2 or more organizations apply for the grant? How much can they apply for together? It's the same amount. The cap is $400,000 if it's one proposal. Let's see here. If organizations wish to partner with schools, what documentation is needed in the grant process to indicate the school's willingness to be a partner? So the reason why this question was asked is that some people were applying, mentioning partners, but then come to find out we weren't giving any sort of notification to the people that they were claiming to be partnering with, in this particular case, school districts. So our response to that is communication is very important. If you are talking about partnering with someone in your application, they should be aware that you are planning to partner with them and they are supportive of that partnership. There will also be required interviews, and this will be an opportunity to have all the proposals stakeholders attend and demonstrate to the panel that there is in fact a partnership. Another question is how will we monitor the progress for funded organizations? We can talk a little bit more about that after the selection process, but from a bird's eye view, we will have a team in place to work with funded agencies. Part of what it will mean to partner with us will be to have all staff go through a credible messenger training, attend required monthly check-ins, any additional regular check-ins, working closely with BSK evaluation team, which you saw, you met Sophia, and technical assistance and capacity building will be available for contract recipients. Just a moment here, we have some questions. Just to clarify, we only need to meet the character limits for each question, but not a total page limit, correct? Yes, so in this particular case, and I'm sorry for the confusion about the RFP and then how does that translate to the Zoom grants, but you're gonna wanna pay attention to the character limit. That's what you're working off of. Hopefully that answers your question. Can we see an example of a previous successful application for this strategy? So this strategy is new for BSK. We encourage you to have multiple people read your application and rate it against a criteria instead of basing it off of any previous RFP applications or proposals. Another question is what does the grant ask for in terms of a sustainability plan? So we want to see organizations that we partner with be successful and competitive for future funding. A lot of people that know about direct services don't necessarily know about administrative work. This RFP investment partnership will also be an opportunity to demonstrate through evaluation that your organization is effective, which is influential for future investors. Next question is, so Jake said he had some technical difficulties. So asking for clarification to the second question that Dallas asked, which was, we only need, just to clarify, we only need to meet the character limits for each question, but not a total page limit, correct? Yeah, so you're paying attention to the character limits on the Zoom grants. And sorry for the confusion around that. This is actually our first time working with Zoom grants for this particular RFP, but we're hoping to use it a little bit. If things are successful and this works out well for our applicants, we plan on using Zoom grants or some sort of online grant management system as our standard procedure. Unless anybody has any other questions, I'm going to keep on going. And we're almost done here. Thank you so much for your patience. I know this is a little tedious.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Is there a minimum number, or what's kind of like the average or minimum number of youth you're hoping to serve through each of the funded organizations?
It depends on the particular proposal, how many staff will be working with them. There's a number of variables that are involved with that. So I think that for instance, if you have somebody who is providing resources and is building relationship and is doing some level of engagement, at least from my past experience, standard amounts of youth, and again, this depends on the depth and what type of service you're providing or what the program is, maybe 20 to 30 youth.
Per staff member or per program?
Per staff person, yeah. And you'll notice that I'm trying to avoid a lot of language like caseload and all that kind of stuff like that. We're trying to phase that out because these kids aren't cases, as you probably already know. But so forgive me if I am trying to work around what I think is a little bit better language. But yeah, and again, that really depends on what exactly it is that you're proposing. Because if you're doing something really in depth, you may not have the capacity to work with 20 to 30 youth. And we want to be sensitive to that. So we don't want to put any number restrictions on this.
Okay. And is there any expectation that those same youth will be engaged in the program for the duration of the 18 months, or can that look different based on the program design?
Yeah, it can look different in program design because some programs are set up so that you're only working with them for those 3 months, and then some you're working with them for 4 years, and it's beyond the contract capacity of, the extent of this particular contract. Which, by the way, it's as is a standard for all of BSK contracts. We don't go beyond 3 years. So this one is set up as two back-to-back 18-month contracts. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so another one here is, should we indicate if we're also applying for the King County or BSK funds? There are several RFPs open. So this is one we talked about before, but I wanted to give a little bit more detail around that question. And I'll ask it again. So should we indicate if we are applying, should we indicate if we are also applying for other King County or BSK funds? There are several other RFPs open right now, and you can indicate what your other funding requests are for the narrative section of the application. The most important thing is to be transparent. If you're applying for the same program, you should mention other funding sources, but if you are applying for different programs, there is no need to mention in your narrative. And unless anybody had any questions, I was just going to continue with some of the frequently asked questions here. Okay. Will we need to pay for technical assistance? No, this is provided by the county. The county will work with contract partners to determine a suitable technical assistance. Let's see here. How do we ensure that all organizations are able to apply as opposed to getting caught up in background checks? So, for some staff who may have some sort of criminal history, would that prevent them from being able to work this program? It obviously depends on the type of criminal history. If it's something that is inappropriate for them to be working with youth and young adults or with community, then I would say that would not be a good idea, and maybe be at a detriment to your program, regardless if you're getting funding from us or not. But we also recognize that So provide a little bit more clarification around it. The boilerplate for the contract is on Zoom grants. You can look through that to see what King County expects. Additionally, we expect organizations to ensure that they are screening their staff. If there are staff that have been through the justice system and have turned their life around, they can be very effective because they can relate or have parallel experiences and may have more effective relationships in the communities. So in some cases, that person, because of that, again, that parallel experience, it may be to their advantage to be a part of this program. And the last questions here. Is there a planning phase before implementing a new program? Yes. You can budget for time within the 18-month contract for planning and working with you to decide what performance measures, what those performance measures will look like during the planning and initial implementation phase. We want to give you enough time to demonstrate what you are doing is effective. So that's part of the reason why we extended out to 18 months instead of the typical year-long contract, because we wanted to give some time for people to do some planning and working out the implementation. How long into the BSK levy are we? So the BSK levy is 6 years. We're into our second year, so that means there's 4 years left. That means that this levy will expire in 2021, and we're hoping that it will be renewed, but I'll talk about that some other time. Can you let us know what other funding opportunities will be coming out in the near future? I applied for a different strategy, and this is actually a better fit. So we're not able to necessarily be able to exactly touch on what the next RFP is going to look like, but we're also open to your feedback and insight so that we can determine what the next RFP should look like in terms of investments. So, shameless plug, but that's an opportunity to be a part of our Stop the School to Prison Pipeline Task Force. And who sets the outcomes for the provider? We will meet to develop these together. When organizations are doing similar work, we will meet together to define what those outcomes are. So we would encourage folks to subscribe to the blog to get the latest updates. And just to let you know, if you are on Zoom grants, that's also a way for us to be able to effectively communicate with you, because we'll have your contact information. So whenever we post anything within Zoom grants, you'll get updates on that as well. Dallas is asking, the demographics section asks for communities currently served. Does this include currently served by the entire agency, just programs in the King County area, or just programs as proposed in the proposal? It would be just programs as proposed in the proposal, primarily. We realize some organizations are far larger than, say, King County, so you don't necessarily need to have all that information. But what we're asking for is when we're asking those type of questions, we want to know what your experience is. Like, who do you typically serve, not just who you're going to be, or you plan on serving with this particular proposal. In some cases, we've had folks who, say, for instance, have never worked with a particular community, and then for this proposal, they plan on doing that. I think it's important for us to know whether you have experience with that, because that's going to impact your ability to be able to effectively. That's going to impact the planning process, and it's something important for us to take into consideration. It's basically, do you have that background experience? Does that answer that question, Dallas? Did somebody else have a question?
Yeah. So my understanding is decisions will be made at the end of the year, and then the expectation is that programs will start in January. Is there any window or allowable time for, if it's a new program or if it's an expanded program, time to hire on additional staff and kind of ramp up?
Well, developing the contract won't necessarily stop you from getting your program up and going, but I kind of realize some of what you're saying, and we're going to try to spend all of January because for a lot of folks, they really want to get their program up and going as soon as possible. So let me come back to you on that one. I think that's one that we want to be very careful about how we answer that, because we've been getting a lot of feedback from people wanting to get their program up and going as soon as possible because of funding limitations. But I also hear what you're saying, it takes some time to get those things figured out. That being said, just because you have the contract set in place doesn't necessarily mean that you have to start implementing or meeting certain outcomes right away. Or we can identify what the outcomes may look like for the first period of time, for the first portion of that 18 months. Perhaps when we initially establish the contract, the first steps would be just making sure that you have hired staff, and so that would be your outputs or your outcomes for the initial part of that contract. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And again, we want to work, we want to be as collaborative as possible, because we don't want to put people in a position where they feel rushed or we're left hanging in terms of trying to meet their budget needs. And you'll see here that Hannah posted the link. You can subscribe to our blog at that particular link, and to the Best Starts for Kids newsletter, including the RFP notices at the link she's indicated there, into your email in the lower left corner. Oh, one more question here, sorry. So if this is an entirely new program, but we have similar services in the area, should we talk about those demographics? Make sure I understand that correctly.
Serving since it's a new program.
Say that again.
They don't know exactly who they're going to be serving since it's a new program. Should they use demographics from someone?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's come back to that question, because I want to be careful about how I answer that one. Because my hope is, and my understanding leading up to this point, is that people have a sense as to who it is that they expect to be working with. But if it's a particularly new program, like I think, Dallas, it might be helpful to have a better understanding as to who did you have in mind when you were developing that program. And I also hope that when you were developing that program, who was involved in developing that program. I think it's particularly important that the people that you're hoping to serve were involved with how you develop that program, not just in the implementation of it. So one of the things that you'll see as a principal, or one of the guiding principles, is how are the youth and young adults, the parents, those most impacted, how are they involved with the planning process? So we'll make sure and provide a much more articulate answer around that, so that we can make sure we understand and get you what you need. Anyone else? We have a few minutes left. I know we cooked through a ton of information. Don't worry, this will all be posted, including the slides. Sorry for all the technical difficulties. Good. Okay. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing your proposals. Have a wonderful day. Take care.